What's the matter? Old man Army teach you how to wash windows and beg for tips. Matthew didn't answer. He just wiped the last corner of the glass, then bent down to pick up a gum wrapper from the sidewalk, something no one else would have bothered with. As he stood up, a small, worn badge fell from his coat pocket. A man in uniform nearby froze. Wait, that's Sergeant Kessler, Ghost Hawk. He saved my father's life. Comment below, would you have stopped to help him or walked right past, then hear what really happened. Matthew Richard Kessler stood at 5'10", shoulders slightly stooped, the weight of years clinging to every movement. His skin was sun-darkened and weathered, like worn leather. Tufts of gray curled from beneath a faded Army patrol cap, one that hadn't left his head in years. He wore a surplus field jacket olive green, buttons mismatched, the fabric thinned at the elbows. When he walked, it was with quiet purpose, and when he paused, he always squared his stance, as if still waiting for orders. Every morning, Matthew would emerge from his old RV parked behind a dusty gas station near the outskirts of town. The RV barely ran, but it kept the rain out. He washed his face with cold water from a cracked thermos, tucked in his shirt, and headed to Lou's Diner, a small eatery that paid him $20 a day to sweep the floor and take out trash. He never complained, never asked for more. He greeted everyone with a respectful nod, and at the end of each shift, he folded his hands behind his back and said, "Thank you for letting me work." One afternoon, outside the diner, he noticed an elderly woman drop her coin purse on the sidewalk. Before anyone else reacted, Matthew bent down, picked it up gently, and handed it back with both hands. "Ma'am," he said softly, his voice gravelly yet kind. She looked surprised, maybe at the gesture or maybe at the fact he called her ma'am with such natural dignity. He didn't wait for a thank you. He simply tipped his cap and returned to scrubbing the diner's window, as if nothing had happened. That Friday was hotter than usual. As Matthew wiped the outside window of Lou's Diner, a group of bikers pulled up. They were loud, laughing too hard at nothing. One of them, a man with a shaved head and mirrored shades, pointed at Matthew and sneered, "Hey, Gramps, the 70s called, they want their corpse back." The others howled. Matthew didn't flinch. He simply lowered his rag, gave a small nod, and turned back to his work. Behind the counter, the owner looked away. Across the street, a cop watched and didn't move. Minutes later, one of the bikers stormed into the diner, shouting that his wallet was missing. Without hesitation, fingers pointed toward Matthew. "He's the only one close enough," someone muttered. Lou, the owner, stepped out. "Matt, I'm sorry, but I can't have this. You need to leave." Matthew didn't argue. He removed his cap, nodded once, and walked out silently. As the diner crowd buzzed with murmurs and sideways glances, a tall man in a pressed white shirt and khaki slacks stepped out from a parked SUV nearby. His badge wasn't visible, but his bearings spoke volumes. Lieutenant Colonel Jackson Hill, logistics officer at Fort Bragg, had only stopped by for coffee, but when he saw the silver pin glinting beneath the old man's frayed jacket, his steps slowed, eyes locked in disbelief. Hill bent down and picked up the object that had fallen, an old, scuffed silver badge. It bore the image of a hawk gripping a tomahawk. Ghost Hawk, a decommissioned covert unit, highly classified, long buried. His voice dropped. This can't be real. Only the first-gen teams had these." He turned to Matthew. "You were Ghost Hawk." Matthew didn't answer. He just met Hill's eyes, steady and silent, and that silence somehow said more than words. Hill opened his secure access app, typing quickly. No file came up under Matthew R. Kessler, but when he filtered by Ghost Hawk 2003, Iraq, one file appeared, redacted, classified, but just enough detail to strike him. Operation Silent Ember, a team extraction, 9 hostages saved. The report credited a senior sergeant who led under fire, wounded twice, refused evacuation. Final note, declined commendation, requested anonymity. Hill looked up again. The man before him, quiet, weathered, dignified, was the same man buried in the files. Hill's voice trembled as realization hit. 17 years ago, my father, Charles Hill, Army combat medic, was hit in that operation. He told me. Someone carried him 3 clicks under sniper fire to the evac zone. He never got a name. He stepped closer, his tone almost reverent. That was you, wasn't it? Matthew said nothing. He adjusted his cap slightly, then gave a small, deliberate nod. Hill's jaw tightened. My father died 3 years ago, but he never forgot you. Neither will I. Hill's fingers flew across his phone again, digging deeper into the archive systems. The military personnel database still showed nothing under Matthew's name. That's impossible, he muttered. Then he saw it in an old audit report buried in a logistics review. Discharge status, administrative irregularity due to record loss. He looked up, stunned. Your entire service record was flagged as missing. That's why no benefits, no recognition. It wasn't just forgotten, it was deleted by mistake. 20 years ago. Matthew didn't look surprised. He simply said, they told me to move on. So I did. Just then, a police officer stepped forward, hand hovering near his belt. Sir, he barked toward Matthew. We've had a complaint. I need you to come with me. Hill moved between them. Stand down, he ordered. Tone sharp, authoritative. This man is a decorated combat veteran. The officer scoffed. I don't care who he was. Right now, he's disrupting business. Matthew raised a hand. It's all right, he said softly. I've been through worse. But his eyes, for the first time, betrayed fatigue. The officer reached for the cuffs. Matthew didn't resist. He simply exhaled and extended his wrists. But Hill stepped forward. Voice steel sharp, do not touch him. The officer hesitated. I outrank your entire department, Hill continued. And you're seconds away from putting your hands on a man who bled for your freedom. People began to gather. Someone started filming. The officer lowered his hands slowly. His mouth opened, but nothing came out. A black SUV screeched to a halt across the street. From it stepped a tall, broad man in full uniform, Major General Cameron Price. He strode across the pavement with intent, his face unreadable. Hill saluted. Sir, I called this in. I believe we found Sergeant First Class Matthew Kessler. Price's eyes landed on Matthew and suddenly softened. I don't believe, he said. I know. General Price stopped inches from Matthew. 2003. Operation Silent Ember. 9 hostages. 2 wounded teammates carried out. 1 refused evacuation. Twice. He turned to the crowd. Matthew Kessler was nominated for the Medal of Honor. He declined. Said I didn't do anything the others wouldn't have done. Gasps rose from onlookers. The bikers shrank back. Matthew, still silent, stood straighter. Not prouder, just steadier. As if all he had ever needed was to be remembered correctly. General Price's voice dropped. He wasn't just lost in the system, he was sacrificed by it. He looked directly at the officer. Kessler refused to testify against a teammate accused unjustly. He took the fall, resigned quietly. It was the only way to clear the other man. Hill clenched his jaw. He gave up everything. For someone else's dignity, Matthew finally spoke. He had kids. I didn't. For a second, no one spoke. Even the birds seemed to fall silent. Price took a breath. His voice softened. You could have spoken up, fought the system. Why didn't you? Matthew looked up, eyes calm, because the noise wasn't worth more than the man I protected. Quiet honor is still honor. Price turned to the crowd, now deadly silent. This man didn't just serve. He chose to disappear so someone else could live free. And then, to Matthew, you didn't lose your uniform. Sergeant, we just forgot how to salute the right people. One of the bikers stepped back, trying to blend into the crowd, but Hill pointed at him. You, what's your name? The man hesitated. You think mocking a decorated combat hero makes you a man? The biker looked down. We didn't know. Price cut in. That's the point. You never asked. The crowd had shifted. Where there was laughter, now there was shame. Even the police officer looked down at his boots. Matthew didn't gloat. He just straightened his jacket, eyes steady, not angry, just resolute. A black sedan pulled up military legal affairs. A young JAG officer stepped out, clipboard in hand. I'm here to file immediate misconduct reports, she said, glancing at the cops. She handed documents to the precinct sergeant. We're reviewing civil rights violations against Sergeant Kessler. Cameras had begun rolling. Reporters arrived. The same town that turned its back on Matthew now watched him with reverence. Someone whispered, we owe him an apology. But Matthew didn't seem to hear. He was staring at the horizon as if waiting for something more than justice. 3 days later, on the steps of the town hall, a small ceremony was held. No parade, no fanfare, just a flag, a podium, and silence. Lieutenant Colonel Hill stood beside General Price. Matthew wore a cleaned and pressed version of his old uniform, still faded, still humble. The mayor stepped forward, voice trembling. On behalf of this town, we apologize. Sergeant First Class Kessler, for what we didn't see, for what we forgot. Matthew didn't bow. He saluted short, firm, and full of grace. The bikers' faces, pale and downcast, stood near the back. They had been fined, ordered to perform community service, and required to issue a written public apology. Matthew never looked at them. He had no need for revenge. Dignity, once lost, wasn't restored by punishment but by remembrance. As the ceremony ended, a voice broke through the crowd. Dad Matthew turned. A woman in her 30s, tears on her cheeks, stepped forward. Emily Kessler. They hadn't spoken in over a decade, drifted apart after the fire that claimed her mother. She held out a trembling hand. Matthew didn't hesitate. He pulled her into an embrace that didn't need words. The crowd quietly gave them space. That evening, Hill handed Matthew a folder. Your full military benefits are reinstated. Housing, pension, everything. Matthew nodded slowly. That's more than I expected. There's one more thing, Hill added. The Department of Defense had invited Matthew to write about his years in silence for a book on forgotten heroes. He didn't answer right away. He looked out toward the flag in the distance. I'll think about it, he said. But maybe it's time someone remembered us, properly. Within a week, Matthew's story had gone viral. Clips from the diner confrontation flooded social media. Veterans reposted them. Journalists interviewed Hill. A local news anchor called it the day America looked back. Across the country, forgotten veterans were suddenly being sought, seen, and heard. A bill was even introduced in Congress. The Kessler Amendment to review lost records of service members who never received recognition. People began to refer to him as the quiet salute, not a protest, not a slogan, just a man who stood tall in silence until truth found him. Murals were painted. A statue commissioned in his hometown's Veterans Park, Matthew in uniform, hand raised in salute, not toward a crowd but toward the horizon. A reminder that some heroes don't raise their voices. They raise others. Emily bought him a small home with a porch, using funds from a community campaign. Every morning, Matthew sat outside, coffee in hand, birds chirping. He had nothing flashy, just peace. And one morning, he opened a box delivered to his doorstep. Inside, his long-lost Medal of Honor, found and approved posthumously after the record correction. He stared at it for a long time, then quietly placed it next to his wife's photo. She'd laugh at this, he murmured. The final image was shared in newspapers and screens across the country. Matthew, in his old jacket, saluting the flag at dawn. Beside him stood Emily, hand over heart. No music, no sound, just the wind and morning light. The caption read, "You don't need a voice to remind people what dignity looks like." And Matthew's last public words, "Don't salute me. Salute what's right." Sometimes those we overlook carry the quiet weight of everything we value: honor, sacrifice, and truth. It's not the loudest man in the room who defines justice. It's the one who lives it, even when no one's watching.